Oh, wait, let me turn on the touch of my face feature.
Okay, does everyone see my screen? Fantastic, okay. So hello everyone, Marie here from Tech and Learning. Thank you for attending the Tech and Learning Virtual Leadership Summit being held today and tomorrow from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern. A special thank you to our sponsors, Guide K-12, now Forecast 5 Analytics, MediaSite, Prezi, and Nariva. Today's virtual summit brings together top-level executives from school districts around the country with education technology buying responsibilities. Our virtual summit provides an environment where district leaders can share their successes and challenges in facilitated small group discussions. I'd like to remind everyone to log in to the Conference Hub using the link sent in your confirmation email. Once you are logged in, you can visit our sponsors in their virtual booths and their Zoom meeting room to learn about their offerings and book one-to-one meetings. Each visit to a sponsor Zoom room earns you 20 entries to our Passport to Prizes, and we will announce the winners via email at the end of the conference. In the Conference Hub, you can also see your personalized agenda, network with today's attendees via registrant directory and chat, as well as access all the conference resources in the download section. So before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions for the presenters during the sessions, please submit them through the Zoom chat feature. Please know we capture all questions and our presenters are happy to answer them as time permits. Today's slides and additional resource materials are available and may be accessed within the Downloads tab in the Conference Hub. We encourage you to download any resources and links you may find useful. Be sure to use the conference hashtag #TLTechLive in all of your social media posts. And so let me introduce you to Christine Weiser.
Hello, everybody. Good morning and welcome. So I am thrilled to be here with you, and let me see here. So I wanted to, so of course we are talking this morning about social emotional learning. This is obviously a huge topic, and also just kind of mental wellness. We were kicking off this call just talking about just the, the challenges that all of you are facing as district leaders here, and then of course the students. Families. So I first wanted to introduce our featured speaker. Jim Klein is a good friend of Tech and Learning. He's a CTO at Las Virgenes, I don't know how to pronounce that, Unified in California. He will correct me when he introduces himself. But I do want to say, please, we want this to be a conversation. So please put your questions and ideas in the chat. And after we hear from Jim, we're going to turn it over to some Q&A and some idea sharing. So please keep that conversation going in the chat. And without further ado, please welcome Jim Klein.
All right. Hey, everybody. Let me see if I can get my screen up here. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So I am Jim Klein. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Las Virgenes Unified School District. You were very close. We are a school district in Southern California, in Calabasas. I like to say in Kardashian country because, that's where the Kardashians are. We get to deal with them all the time. All kinds of fun there. We have about 10,000 students and about 2,000 staff. This topic that we're talking about, I think, is incredibly important considering the times that we're in, especially with our kids being so isolated, being at home all the time. But it doesn't just end there. I know we're having a lot of challenges now, but once our kids get back in school, social emotional is just as important. And before I start my first slide, I forgot to mention on this slide, you'll see a link, bit.ly.tlsel. That's my slide presentation. So if you want to pull that up at any time, just go ahead and grab that. I've linked all of the resources that I have in here to that slide deck. So if you click on anything, you'll be able to download all of it and definitely steal our stuff. I mean, that's what we want you to do. Steal everything that we've got. We want to spread the word on this stuff. It's really important that we all take this really, really seriously. So at LVUSD, several years ago, actually, we recognized that social emotional was kind of a key component of learning for our kids. And so often, we focus on the college and career, as you see in this slide, but we kind of forget the whole child side of it. So we started an initiative probably about 4 years ago, called Student 360, which endeavored to cover all of those things and meet the entire needs of our kids, because we recognize that while all the college and career preparation is very important, kids really won't be successful unless we're considering the social emotional aspects as well of our kids' needs when it comes to learning. Now, Student 360 combines six key components, or six key principles. And those are positive mindset, autonomy, independence, collaborative communities, mindfulness and thoughtfulness, empathy and understanding, and persistence and grit. And as you can see, we have icons here set aside for all of these. And what I'm showing you here is a card. And this is a card that we hand out to all of our teachers at the beginning of the year in our early training every year, to remind them that these are kind of key components of their learning activities. And they can use this card sort of as a framework for constructing their lessons around social emotional learning and considering social emotional aspects when they're building their lessons. So this is the front side of the card that reminds them of the core principles. And then there's the core practices on the back side of the card with student vital actions. And we'll often change these around from year to year, but you can see the student vital actions on this one are things like, for example, all students participate and are present and focused on the learning. The principle is equity requires participation. And then you can see the Student 360 icon alignments on the right side. Same thing, students talk about each other's thinking, not just their own, and listen to each other's responses with focus, presence, and empathy, right? That's really important. Those kinds of things are really important to bringing real impact into our classrooms and really considering the social emotional needs of our kids. So these kinds of things make a huge difference as teachers are preparing for, preparing their lessons for kids, preparing their learning opportunities and activities. And they also cause our teachers to think a little bit differently about the learning process. It pulls them away from the front of the classroom and pulls them away from the sage on the stage mindset and gets them more toward kids participating, kids having conversations, kids working with each other, kids helping, or kids working to understand other folks' points of view. So it really makes a huge difference. Beyond that, once we got through the initial stage with the cards, the next thing that we offer is a scope and sequence. And the scope and sequence is based on the Association of School Counselors, or the American Association of School Counselors, sorry. And they have a series of standards for students on a social and emotional basis. So we built a scope and sequence around that for all grade levels, K through 12, and I'll bring that up really quick. Just so you can kind of see it. So for example, this is a JK. JK is our TK, Identify Feelings and Emotion, which is an ASCA standard. Covers our Student 360 domains of mindfulness and thoughtfulness and empathy and understanding. And then at the end here, we'll have sites with curricular ideas. We'll have book ideas, feeling charts, emotional faces, those kinds of things that can be used in the classroom. Same thing as we work our way down, you'll see first grade has first and second grade alternative points of view, which is ASCA standard PSA 2.2. Our domain would be empathy, understanding, and collaborative communities. We have community circle prompts here. We have community circle guidelines here. Classroom read alouds about the golden rule, for example. So these are all things that address the social emotional needs of our kids. And we find those to be very important and very useful. And as you can see, it's important to provide not just the frameworks, not just the principles, but also to provide the resources and the tools to help teachers to be successful, because this is so much, this is a big topic, and it's not something that we're trained really well to do in school. One of the fun things that we do as an example for our elementary kids is these are our kindness cards. This is something that we started doing a couple of years ago. And if you click on this, it brings up a whole set of them. There's 40 of them. And we produce all of these and get them all laminated for our elementary school teachers, and they hand them out to their kids before they go off to recess or before they go off to lunch, and ask the kids to do one of these things, which is kind of a social emotional activity. So you'll see this one says, help someone carry his or her things. At recess, ask your friend, what would they like to do? Things like that will help our kids to kind of reach out, help our kids to connect, help our kids to talk to each other and to learn more about each other, to experience empathy and experience mindfulness and those sorts of things. And then we also have restorative approaches. So we recognize that there's going to be conflict out there. There's going to be challenges out there. There's going to be situations where you have to have conversations, where you have to work out and resolve problems. And so we built out recently a deck of restorative approaches cards, which talks about basically creating circles. You know, it's got a circle mindset. How can we create a circle and have a conversation? It has guidelines, effective questions, and then a variety of different circle types that you can use to have those conversations, to initiate those conversations, and to work through those problems with kids, which is really important. So all of that, you know, those kinds of activities make a big difference when it comes to reaching needs of our kids, especially on an emotional level. But we recognized also that it's not just about the kids, you know, it's also about our families. It's also about our community. So we created a website called Community 360, which now reaches out to our parents and reaches out to our community and asks them to participate in the learning process. With our kids. We have an app that links to all of our resources on this site. And here we have things like a free virtual summer camp that we threw together this year because we recognize that our kids are feeling isolated. How can we create some opportunities for our kids to get together? It has summer workshops, it has dance classes, it has, you know, books, it has creative drawing, it has art and those sorts of things. And we also have things like our LV Reads program, which is Summer Reading Challenge, where we are asking our kids to read books and then post about the books that they learned on social media and have conversations about them. We have a podcast here. We also have a library. We actually created a virtual library where you can check out, where parents can actually check out books to help them learn how to meet the social and emotional needs of their kids. So for example, we have books like Switch, we have Drive, we have The Power of Moments, we have Where You Go Is Not Who You Are, we have a number of great titles for our parents to check out. These are all on Sora, which is a loan site essentially for Overdrive, so that our parents can actually have these conversations. We'll have book studies with our parents from the Community 360 site. We often do movie screenings. We did a screening of Like, so our parents can understand the social media pressures that our kids are under and had conversations about those. So all of these things, you know, are really important when it comes to having those conversations, when it comes to considering the social emotional needs of our kids. And these approaches have been very successful for us. Finally, I would add that one of the newer things that we did a couple of years ago was we created a counseling center, and it's actually a community counseling center, and you'll see that link on the Community 360 site. That center has certified counselors available for entire families. So if we have a challenge, if we experience a challenge, if we see, for example, on social media that some suicidal ideation, we'll contact those parents and those children and ask them to come in and have a conversation with the counselors. If a family is struggling, they're free to contact us and come in and talk to those counselors and work through those issues so that we can make sure that the home life is just as considerate, just as kind and as good as it can be, so that kids can be successful at school, because we know that home life has such a dramatic impact on our kids' school life. So those are some of the things that we're doing at LVUSD to reach our kids' social emotional needs. This obviously was super brief. You know, I could probably talk about this for about 2 or 3 hours or so and go into detail on all the resources, but I kind of want to just get the conversation started by sharing some of the things that we're doing at LVUSD to make things successful for our teachers and for our students.
Great. Thank you, Jim, so much. I had a question from Amy asking about the summer virtual camp. How is the attendance on that? Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit.
The virtual camps have actually been really good. We're doing, we have a couple of different things. We have the virtual dance classes and those sorts of things. Those are getting, on average, 30 to 50 kids or so per class. We have a lot of classes available. Interestingly enough, of course, as you get into the beginning of the summer, you have a whole bunch participating and then they kind of dwindle off a little bit. So you have to do some things to boost them back up. And we're talking about working on figuring out ways to make that happen. Another thing with our reading program, one of the things we're doing with our summer reading program is we have a webinar every Wednesday with a guest author. So we're bringing guest authors in to talk to the kids and talk about books and to, excite kids about reading and those sorts of things. And those started out hugely attended. We had 200 or 300 kids attending these webinars, and they started to peter off a little bit. So we've learned to kind of structure our our authors so that our super high-end authors, our super popular authors, are kind of in the middle, so we can boost the attendance back up in the middle and keep the attendance strong in those things. But we've been quite impressed actually by the community's commitment to all of these things. It's been really great.
That's great. Thank you. So sorry if I missed this, but you mentioned you have a plan now as of today. What is the plan for going back? Are you going to do hybrid, blended?
So we're doing a couple of things. The first thing that we're going to do, so we're basically setting it up so that parents can make a choice. They can either choose to have an on-campus model, or they can choose to have virtual academies. So we set up an actual virtual academy, or it's just kind of like a virtual school. So because we recognize that there are going to be a number of parents that are, just not ready to send their kids back. They need to have the full virtual instruction model. Now, we aren't doing a hybrid or a blended model per se. What we are doing is kind of a cohort style model. So there will be a cohort of kids being on campus in the morning, and then there'll be a different cohort of kids coming in the afternoon to the cleaning period in the middle in our elementary schools. In our high schools and middle schools, there's going to be kind of a block model. So we're implementing a block schedule across all of our secondary. And they'll, on one day in the morning, they'll go to periods 1, 3, and 5, and then the next day they'll go to 2, 4, and 6, and we'll switch cohorts morning and afternoon to make all of that work. So there'll be an online component, there'll be an in-class component, so that we can keep all the kids safe and meet the guidelines of the state. But it's tricky. We're going all virtual now in the fall because if you paid attention to the California news, at least Gavin Newsom said that declared earlier in the week that unless schools are completely off an area is completely off the watch list, they have to go virtual. So we had to shift that plan. So now, instead of starting on August 19th with our on-campus, we're now aiming to start after Labor Day, assuming that everything comes into play. But we could find ourselves, back in a full virtual model again. But we're doing our best to be as flexible as possible.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, keep the questions coming. I actually spoke with a couple of our attendees here who had some other ideas to share, if that's okay to say. I know Eileen, we talked earlier about what you're doing in Massachusetts. I wondered if you would be open to sharing a little bit about that. So you're on mute.
I have to preface it with saying I am in a brand new district as of 3 days ago. So,
so you're going to talk about what they're doing.
so I went from the northern Berkshires of Massachusetts to Cape Cod. So,
nice.
Yeah. So it's actually a big promotion for me. So it's nice to see a former math teacher, high school principal become a director of technology and information. So
congratulations.
That is awesome.
I get excited. So I am going to steal every idea, Jim, that you have and call it my own. And
you should.
They're just going to pay me more than my contract. So what we've been talking about this at Mount Greylock is the district I was in, a small rural district, and we've been talking about this for about a year and a half. So what I like to see what Jim's doing and what we were doing is having already processes in place and programs in place pre-pandemic that we're trying to move into the virtual environment. And both here and at Mount Greylock, the challenge is how do you do that? How do you fully engage students in this? And how do you identify those students who need more support? And I think that's the biggest challenge that we're finding is identifying those students and find ways to support them.
That is definitely a trick.
Yeah, in this remote environment. I think because we have been doing it, and I say this about one-to-one and everything else we've all done brilliantly in the last 2 years in districts, 3 years in districts, this is just what we're doing intensified. So it's as long as we've been doing these programs, it's easy to implement them or just expand them in an online environment. It's really difficult for districts who weren't doing this prior to the pandemic to all of a sudden try to create a culture where people are being kind to each other or empathy is happening. And so yeah, I think it's I feel like we're at a better place I was in a better place. I think I'm in a much better place here, but I don't know what they're doing here yet.
Yeah.
I barely know my IT staff's name yet. So, but I really like how Jim is doing it in his district. A question I have for Jim is, how big is your district?
We're 10,000 students.
Okay.
So we're K through 12. We have 2 high schools, 3 middle schools, and 8 elementaries.
Okay. Okay. So you have a few more resources than our smaller districts do, but I think it definitely.
Well, I think you have more than I do. You probably your annual budget's probably bigger than mine. California is like 48th or 49th. So our situation kind of stinks. Actually, a lot of the stuff that we're doing here is through grants. So the counseling center, for example, a lot of school districts wouldn't be able to afford, but we were able to get some grants to support the counseling center, which we can keep in operation, after hours and things like that to make all of that stuff work. So lots of different safety grants, and we're grabbing money anywhere that we can grab it to make all of this stuff happen. But it's really tricky. But I agree with you. It's really tough to shift this mindset that you had in the classroom to a virtual environment. And one of the biggest factors that we found was training, because, getting our teachers going with things like Zoom breakout rooms, even because, if you're going to have these small group discussions and you're going to think pair shares and you're doing all those kinds of things, you have to actually break the kids out and get them all doing those things and then get them all coming back. And you can't really watch them while they're doing it without bouncing in and out of breakout rooms. And that's a whole new ball game for teachers. So that's another factor. And that's one of the things that we have been working on as far as our plans go. When we did the emergency shift to virtual learning, we kind of, we had to do it building the plane while we're flying it. So it's, how can we help our teachers just get online? How can we help them get into the meeting rooms? How can we help them think about building content and creating time where they're doing instruction, but then student work time and all those sorts of things. Now going into the fall, especially knowing that we have to go virtual, our parents have much higher expectations. They want it to be much broader. They want it to be much more like regular school was, and they want a lot of consistency there. So that's where we've been really pushing hard to get the training done so that we can get our folks using those tools the most effective way possible, and to kind of replicate some of those learning strategies that I talked about in a virtual environment. And that's really tricky. And also identifying those kids who need help. That's a really interesting challenge. We actually, when we first switched over, we recognized this was going to be a problem because we were so steeped in social emotional. So we created a bunch of forums and a bunch of things like that for our teachers and reached out to them on a weekly basis and had conversations about this and said, hey, if you have any kids, definitely refer them to the counseling center. And the counseling center would reach out and arrange meetings with those kids, virtual meetings with those kids, and have some conversations. And we were really doing our best to just keep our finger on the pulse of all of our kids and make sure that they were doing okay.
And I totally agree. And one of the things that we're hearing about is more sexual abuse and child abuse in homes because families are remote. And how do we identify those situations in the remote learning world? And also, which we had been working on prior to this, was working with programs where students can learn how to manage their emotions and virtually, and work with counselors and school psychologists and those kind of things, where they can have an interactive online conversation or meeting where a social emotional piece is coming in, and again, managing behavior and those kind of things. But I really think the biggest thing right now is the fact that students are not having food at home. They're being sexually and physically abused. And I think it's a real struggle for us to be able to identify that.
Yeah, that's a tough thing. Definitely the food situation, we're actually in a little better shape, at least in California. The state mandate is that we provide meals to all families, not just our free and reduced lunch families. So our child nutrition service has grab and goes, and people can come by and pick those up on a daily basis, or they can pick up 2 or 3 meals at a time for all the kids in their family, so that we can make sure that everybody's at least eating. That's that's a huge factor. The other stuff we have to deal with on a case by case. Obviously, it's tricky.
Yeah. What's interesting is that we're talking, as most of us are ed tech leaders, that we're talking about social and emotional. Like we are a player in this conversation, which 5 years ago this would not even be on our radar.
Yeah, well, this is why I said this in the last presentation we did a few weeks back, is that this crisis has catapulted us into the future, right? Because this is kind of where we were heading, but it was going to take us 5 or 10 years to get there. And now we had to all at once implement all of our best dreams and make them all a reality just like that. And so it's gotten us to an interesting place. But we are at the table, and I think that's an important thing. We're all in this together. We're all talking about learning. This is something that I've been pushing Tech and Learning actually for a while, and some of the surveys I keep pushing for. Let's have the conversation about post one-to-one. Those districts who have the mature one-to-one program, what's next? And this is the kind of stuff that's next.
No, absolutely. And we've got a couple of questions come in, and I know Michael Marasa said he and I chatted earlier. He's got some ideas to share too. But a couple of questions. One, I've seen these a lot. If you're virtual, what do you do with your elective courses? And then also, what do you do for your little ones, your K through 2? I think that's a really big challenge. So kind of throw that out to anyone, anyone in the session here, Jim, Eileen, and Michael. I know you were going to throw in some ideas too, but thoughts on that, on electives? Maybe we'll start with the virtual elective courses. Anybody know anything around that?
Well, sadly, I mean, those are going to be some of the casualties of this, and to a large degree. There are some electives you just can't carry. You can do, culinary arts. You can do music. Surprisingly, I wish I had it ready or at the ready, but we did a lot of virtual concerts and things like that, where kids recorded videos, and then we combined them all and pushed the videos out. So you can do those sorts of things. So we're keeping the electives as best we can together, but there are some electives that are going to be tough. And in the times of budget cuts, also, that creates some real challenges there too, because you have to start cutting sections, and electives have a tendency to be the ones that lose on that. For our sports, that's the real trick, because sports are all over the map. So for a while it was you can condition on your own, and then they were having too much trouble with that, so they shut that down. CIF is talking about starting the sports back up again, but probably not until January. I think that's probably a pipe dream. I have a feeling that the 2020 year is done for sports, but I guess we'll see. For our K through 2s, that is definitely a challenge, trying to create virtual learning opportunities for them. The best thing that we've found is to team the teachers up. So we have your K teachers all get together, your K1 teachers all get together and develop content as a group, so that the kids are kind of tag teaming it, so that they can continue to provide activities and actual live interactions with those kids. Our real concern there is once all of this starts to lift, is we're still having the expectation that parents are going to be there to help those kids. And parents are going to have to go back to work, so it's going to be a real challenge there trying to figure it out. What we have seen is we've seen a number of our parents kind of grouping up. So a group of families will say, okay, we're all going to take different days, and the kids go to one house one day, and mom takes a day off and has 3 or 4 of our kids there, and she'll help with all the learning activities and the online with those kids, and then they'll move to the next mom's house, and so on and so forth. So we've talked about possibly putting some structures together to make that more structured and organize that a little bit, but all of these are just kind of ideas that are up in the air.
That's a terrific idea, almost like a blend of homeschool and like really partnering with your family. I love that idea.
Yeah.
Michael, I know you were going to throw in some ideas too.
Yeah, can I speak to what Jim was just talking to about the elective piece? I think it's really important to connect with your people who are the coordinators of those electives. They have professional networks. We all have professional networks like this to share ideas around what you're researching. And so for us, one of the areas that we looked at was initially, what is something cloud-based, like an Amazon or an Azure-based, cloud-based, where if we're looking at Project Lead the Way or those kind of curriculums that we could replicate for some kind of short-term investment. Because yes, while resources are being shrunk in some ways, some of the district's expenditures for travel and for running the building are just not being spent. And so we're looking at reallocating resources to make sure that the needs of our students are being met, specifically in these programs where we know some really career-based content areas we need to address and have some opportunities for kids. And so in some of our programming and some of our engineering type courses, we're actually making an investment in increasing our VPN licensing so that we can set up some access controls and our students can actually remote in to the computers that we have into the school and still access all of the software. And so we're doing some testing with our coordinator on that. Eileen, similar to you, I'm new to a district. I started on May 15th. So
Nice timing.
Congratulations. Yeah, right?
when you get immersed in a job change, let me tell you, COVID-19 is the perfect time to change.
I
It
Well, you're still in the honeymoon period,
I
so you
keep
can't do
saying,
anything
yay,
wrong. Right?
COVID.
Yeah, so for about 2 months, I felt like I was working between two districts, and it was more than just a little chaotic. But one of the things that we're a high school only district, and so we have a unique program in our district where we have what's called an advisor. It's almost like a homeroom program, but our advisor teachers, our students sophomore through senior years have the same advisor for all 3 years, and those teachers really make good parent-home connections with those students. And we know and we recognize that there are just some kids who did not respond well to remote learning. They need that culture and that environment. As you say, Eileen, there are some things that are going on in the home, and stress for our parents that are working at home as well. Don't make these situations any easier for our kids. The home networks and the home broadband is just being stressed with so many people on those networks. And so when our kids drop off those networks, we had to just coach our teachers through just working with them because each individual family circumstance is different. But we thought it was really important for our advisors to stay connected with those students, to communicate with our support services departments, our social work departments, to really identify those students that struggled with remote learning so that we can prioritize as we begin to look at bringing some kids back to school on a small scale when we're ready to do that, that those kids are in the pipeline as kind of first students we're bringing back with our special ed students, just because we know that that remotely they just struggled academically and emotionally.
Yeah, SPED is a whole nother animal. It's a whole ball of mess. That's a tough one.
And I neglected to say, Michael is in Illinois. So are you all online for the fall, Michael?
No decision has been made by the state, but there's several districts that are starting like the first 2-3 months that way. We are starting all remote the first week, and we're just going to take it on a week by week basis and evaluate some things. In one of my sessions that I'm presenting in tomorrow, we've actually changed our course schedule to accommodate the SEL aspect of things. And so instead of a traditional 9-period day where kids don't get a break, we've moved to a block schedule. So kids really only have 4 or 5 classes a day. And we know in some of those blocks that they have periods off. So learning is kind of spread out a little bit. The workload is spread out a little bit. We know we're going to lose some instructional time, but we think it's better emotionally for our students and for our teachers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
it also makes it logistically possible to do cleaning and things like that when kids are on campus,
yeah.
which is a good thing as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned special education. Obviously, that's a whole other session. We only have 5 minutes left, but I'm curious. So it sounds like, you know, that's kind of focusing on that student population, that really high need student population first, and then I'm curious what others, you know, what thoughts from others on that.
Yeah, Christine, I'll speak to that. I am married to a special educator. My wife works with 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds that are autistic.
Oh my God.
And as you can imagine, trying to help those students remotely is near impossible. She spent a lot of her time in sessions with parents in the Zoom room, so to speak, with a panel of teachers that are doing their activities with them. And just to watch and to hear parents struggle because they're not experts in the content area. They don't know, and they're trying to do their best with their kids, and some of these kids just have a hard time sitting and focusing, and just thinking that those parents are now trying to do that during 15 hours a day, whereas when their students would go out to school, those parents could live their work life. They could get some other things done that they would normally do. And so just the stress of that for a family with the special needs, like a more advanced special needs student has got to be so chaotic.
Yeah. The real challenge too is educating our leaders on how special education actually works, because they keep saying silly things like, hey, just rewrite the IEPs, no big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got 2,500 IEPs and you want me to do that by August 19th. How exactly are we going to work that out? Because we have to negotiate that with all the parents. That's not going to work. So yeah, we're struggling with the same kind of things, trying to figure out how can we get kids back in school? How can we maybe open up parts of the school for the SPED team so the SPED team can come in? It's really some real logistical challenges.
Yeah, and Lynn has a question. I've had this question, seen this a bunch too. Are you providing PD to parents? So kind of throw that out for anyone on the call here. So Jim, sounds like you're doing some good partnership with parents and the kind of homeschool sort of cooperative, but other thoughts on kind of formal PD training, and that's a huge piece here.
Christina, I could share. I see Joel's got his hand up too. We actually brought in a child psychologist and had her do an evening webinar to all of our parents that wanted to come. We had over 1,000 attendees, and we actually had Q&A that one of our principals actually facilitated with this child psychologist, just to help parents understand what their kids were going to, some of the space that kids would need psychologically as they were going through some of those challenges. And so that might be something that if your school district's already doing, or you have those kinds of internal experts that you can connect with. That was a really valuable, we got really positive feedback from our parents on that PD event.
That's
Joel?
great. Yeah, Joel, go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of parent training, we've been looking at some of the stuff we did in the spring was to just kind of build video webinars. It wasn't so much live as much as help resources for them to reference. We're going to continue extending that in the fall. But that's one of the areas we have actually talked about recently is how do we get parents more technology confident, I guess would be a good word. One thing we are looking at this fall is that we're going to try to designate a learning coach. So for every family, we're going to ask the parents to kind of identify who is the learning coach, who is the person at home that's going to we should reach out to, when we need to talk to to the parent or to a guardian about the child, who's going to kind of be watching them, helping them through that. So to kind of get a designated person rather than just saying, well, we just need to reach out to parents. We're going to kind of go with this idea of a parent, of a learning coach is one thing we thought of as well, that we're kind of looking at some of the resources out there based on that.
Great idea, Joel. Thank you.
That's good.
Yeah, and Rebecca, thank you for sharing your idea here. I'm going to save the chat, and all this content will be available on demand as well as in our article. But sorry, Jim, I'm going to chime in there on.
Huh? Oh, no, I was just going to say we did similar stuff. I mean, that's, the best way to handle it is to get the information out as quick as possible. So we had, on day one, we had a parent resources site put together, and it was not just the tutorials on how to use Zoom and those sorts of things, but it was also, additional resources for extended learning so that parents who were at home with their kids and had a break because it was a second grader, for example, and they had a half a day worth of instruction or whatever that had additional activities for them to do with their kids, things like that to keep them busy at home and give them some opportunities to learn beyond just what we were doing in school to try to bolster the level of education that our kids were getting.
Amazing. Thank you all for the conversation here. So like I said, this will be available on demand. And we will be doing a follow-up report in Tech and Learning as well. I think we could do an entire conference on social emotional learning. Obviously, there's so many things to talk about. Thank you to Jim and Eileen and Michael and everybody else for chiming in. So now we're going to take a little stretch break, and Marie put the link to the hub, so you can go back to the hub and say hi to our sponsors and our Passport to Prizes. And we'll pick up the next session at noon. If you have any questions for us, there's a live chat on the homepage of the hub. You can ask it there. But thank you so much to everybody for joining us for this session.